Good morning, one and all, and welcome to our very first Children and Family Scrutiny Board meeting of this municipal year. My name is Councillor Dan Cohen. I will be chairing today's meeting. And as you will all well know, this meeting is being webcast on the council's website so that members of the public, that's anybody, who are unable to observe in person can still observe remotely. Who knows where we are being watched as we speak right now. Before I invite members to introduce themselves, can I just welcome some new members of the board. Maria Adams from Leeds Parents and Carers Forum, welcome. Councillors Jenkins, Jones, Flint and Goodall. And can I also thank, for the record, those members who are not with us this year, Councillors Gruen, Blackburn and Amanda Carter, and of course Councillor Bromley, who's moved on to a new board, and Laura Whitaker, who isn't going to be the Young Lives Leeds representative anymore, and we're just waiting for their new nominee from them. And finally, on my list of welcomes, it would be entirely remiss not to welcome our new executive member, who's merged two bodies into one, proving she's entirely indomitable. So Councillor Hayden is now the new and only executive board member covering our scrutiny board. So we welcome you as well this morning. No pressure. Cool. So if we could go around the table introducing ourselves so that so we all know who each other are. So go to the left. Just what we're just going to a bit of a card issue, just one moment. At least you didn't spit on it.
Councillor Karen Renshaw representing Arleston Robin Hood. Thank you.
Good morning, Councillor David Jenkins representing Killingbeck and Seacroft.
Hi everyone, it's Emma Flint, Councillor in Wheatwood Ward.
Good morning everyone, I'm Councillor Oliver Edwards representing Guysie and Rawdon Ward.
Good morning everyone, Councillor Killamanaka, Birmingham and Richmond Hill.
Good morning everyone, it's good to be back for another year of Children and Family Scrutiny. Councillor Jordan Bowden, Round Hayward.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Kaylee Brooks and I'm substituting for Councillor Martin today. Thank you.
Good morning, Councillor Andrew Scopes. I've got two hats on here today. I'm substitute for Councillor Ray Jones, and I'm also here as Scrutiny Chair for Adults' Health and Active Lifestyles for the vaping item. Thank you very much.
Councillor Jules Hesselwood representing Wheatwood Ward.
And Councillor Helen Hayden, Executive Member for Children and Families.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Julie Longworth and I'm Director for Children and Families.
Good morning, everyone. Dan Barton, Deputy Director for Learning within Children and Families.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Farah Khan, Deputy Director for Social Care.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Fiona Venner. I'm the Executive Board Member for Equality, Health and Wellbeing, and I'm just here for the vaping item because it falls into public health.
Good morning, Heather Thompson. I'm Head of Service for Public Health with Healthy Living team here for the vaping item.
Morning, I'm Helen Goddard, Advanced Health Improvement Specialist from the Public Health team, also here for the vaping item.
Morning everyone, Anna Ross, Head of Public Health for Children and Families, also here for the vaping item.
I'm Maria Adams, I'm Leeds Parent Carer Forum.
Good morning, this is Anas Kheto, Parent Governor.
Good morning everyone, I'm Councillor Tim Goodall from Headingley and Hyde Park.
Good morning, Billy Flynn, Councillor for Adlam Wharfdale and substituting for Ryan Stevenson.
Morning, Councillor Rick Downs, Otley Eden Ward.
Morning, everyone. Rob Clayton, Principal Scrutiny Advisor to the board.
Thank you for that, everybody. Can I say a special thank you to Kaylee, Andrew and Billy, who are substituting this morning, particularly Andrew, who's doing it at short notice. Two things, I suppose. We have some newer members. We do tend to use a lot of first names on this scrutiny board. So if that mortally offends you, I apologise profusely. It's not intentional, but we just tend to do a lot of first names. Fabulous. Let us go through the agenda. So item 1, appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents.
Yes, thanks, Chair. There's been no appeals.
Items for exclusion.
There are no items for exclusion, Chair.
Late items of business.
There are no late items.
Declarations of interest.
If there are any under the Leeds to Council Code of Conduct, members should indicate now. I will take silence as none. Thank you, Chair.
Which brings us to apologies.
Yes, Chair, I'll just run through them. I know they've already been referenced. We have Councillor Flynn attending for Councillor Stevenson. We have Councillor Brooks attending for Councillor Martin and Councillor Scopes for Councillor Jones. There are also 2 additional apologies from 2 of our co-opted members, Helen Bellamy and Andrew Graham. Thank you, Chair.
Cheers, Rob. Okay, that takes us to the minutes from the meeting on the 18th of April. That feels like it was about 12 months ago, but it really wasn't. That is starting at number 7 on your minutes pack. I will, as always, go through one page at a time, and hopefully I can count from 7 through to 14 without skipping a number. So page 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. No, nothing anybody needs to correct or anything. Wonderful. Then if somebody, preferably somebody who was actually at the meeting, there we go. I stared straight at Ollie then. It's like, okay. Thank you very much for that. So Councillor Edwards is, yeah, thank you. Right, that takes us to item 7, co-opted members. Rob.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Members from last year will recall the item we took in April on this, which was an attempt to set the scene for this year and try and get the co-opted members in place for this year. The report does cover off the changes that we've had, and the Chair's already mentioned that we are awaiting a new nominee from Young Lives Leeds. But I do have that name, and I would expect them to be in attendance in July. So there are 5 non-voting co-optees, of which one is Young Lives Leeds. We have Kate Blacker, and then we've now got Marie Adams from Leeds Parent Carer, from which is an outcome from the April report. And we also have Helen Bellamy and Nick Tones as school staff representatives. The report does ask for that to be approved under the recommendations.
Thank you. Can't see anybody. Sorry, I should put my microphone on, shouldn't I? Is that okay with everyone? Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, and then we have 2 church representatives, Tony Britton and Andrew Graham. They are the same as last year, and they've been put forward by their nominating organisations. And then lastly, we have a primary parent governor, Mr. Anas Kittu, who came on the board last year, who was appointed for a 4-year term, so just continues on that basis. Just very briefly, Chair, the April meeting, we did agree to look to seek additional parent governor representation in the secondary sector and from silk provision. That is underway. It's not an entirely straightforward process, so I am on with it, and hopefully I'll have a better update on that at the July meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Before we move, yeah, Dan. Sorry, never go to an auction. It's sold. Any questions or comments before we move on to the next item? No. You sure you don't want to say anything, Dan? All right. So let's move on to item 8, scrutiny terms of reference.
Thanks, Chair. This is another item that we take in at the first meeting of the municipal year. So this just sets out Appendix 1, the general terms of reference that are applied to all scrutiny boards. Appendix 2 is Article 6, which relates to scrutiny boards in the Constitution. That also includes the vision for scrutiny, amongst other things, and where the functions sit amongst each board. And then Appendix 3 is scrutiny board remits, which seeks to provide a bit more detail on the remits of each board for member interest, and so I guess the scope of the work that we can bring to the board is included under that. I think that's it, Chair, on that one. Thank you.
Again, before we move on, any comments, queries or questions on any of that? Okay, so they're approved. Okay, thank you. Moving on, item 9, sources of work and work programme for the coming year. Councillor Hayden, Helen, anything you want to say before we, as an introductory piece on this? Julie, the same?
No, just welcome. I'm obviously it's first time at Children's Scrutiny, and it's great to be here. And there'll be a lot of continuation of the great work that Scrutiny has done, Children's Scrutiny has done over the last couple of years, and very much looking forward to Scrutiny's help in dealing with some really tricky issues. So and driving things forward in Leeds for our children and young people. So I don't know whether Julie wants to say anything, but I'm looking forward to working with Scrutiny this year. Thank you.
Just briefly, Chair, just to, I suppose, reiterate, as Councillor Hayden said, just the value that we have for Scrutiny and the significance of the role of Scrutiny. The fact that, as we know, that was highlighted in our last full inspection of local authority children's services. I've got some views in terms of what we might want to look at next year, but I'll be very interested, obviously, to hear the discussions and other people's views prior to that. Thank you.
Thanks. Rob, do you want to speak to the items that we've collated following our meetings with Julie, with Helen, and pick up some of the things from the pre-meet, and then we can crack on forward. And can we just add in, building in, Councillor Renshaw wanted to make sure we incorporate life coaches and their role as well. Just so we've captured that. So between us, we got there. Excellent, Rob.
Yes, thanks, Chair. So the Appendix 3, I think, to this paper, there is the draft work programme for 24-25, which contains some of the work that we did last year, continuation from that, as well as some of the more annual items that the board tends to consider. So that is in there for members to look at. To note, it is presented as this item, but it will move to the end of the agenda, as it always has done for future meetings. So hopefully that represents some of the discussion from last year and the flavour of what we did. It is by no means, and I must stress this, no means set in stone. So it is up, it's some ideas as a starting point for our work programme next year. So this item is brought to provide the board with some potential areas, sources of work for the year. So included within that is a range of the executive board and trying to work positively with the executive board, pre-decision items at the pre-decision scrutiny items, which is stressed in the report as an area where scrutiny can probably add the most value. So that report does provide that, and as the chair did mention, there are some items that the board may wish to look at that we have discussed prior to this public session. So the early years and best start programme has been one that's come up in discussion, and I know it came up in the pre-meet as a potential area where we could add some additional value. The transition from children's to adult services is an area I think the board has looked at previous, and that could encapsulate other parts of the service as well, so transport potentially. And then the children looked after did feature last year, the transformation agenda within children looked after services. That's another area that could potentially come forward. And I think as potentially a bigger piece. It does need work from me though. One of our former board members, Caroline Gruen, did mention something about suitability of curriculum and attendance and a whole range of issues linked to post-pandemic, and how that's impacted children and families. So potentially, Chair, that could be something that could be scoped a bit by me, I guess, and developed into a piece of work as well, subject to the board's comments and discussion today. Thank you.
Yeah, and we discussed within that piece the kind of school curriculum sufficiency, but also how that would link into family help services and early help for families to make sure it was a wider piece. Colleagues mentioned something. We've also discussed SEND post-16 transport and a wider piece around there as well. That might be one strand of a wider report. Colleagues mentioned some other pieces in the pre-meet. It would be helpful if you could just mention some of those now so that we can capture them formally. Should we start with mental health and CAMS? Emma, do you want to start us off on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things raised was access to counselling and support for young people at early stage around anxiety, particularly. And also the waiting lists for CAMS, but the importance of capturing support for young people at early stage and like where we're at as a city with that.
Thank you for that. And some of the other pieces?
Chair, thank you. Just on the, apprenticeships, I think Councillor Flint has mentioned, about apprenticeships, and I thought, work experience. My apologies. Yes. Did you want to start that off, and I can just add on my piece? Is that okay? Thank you.
Sorry, I've had a couple of years off scrutiny, so time to think about things to raise. Another thing I suggested we look at is the experience of work experience for young people at school, and I think there's just a real we're failing young people, I think, in work experience. So if your parents are well connected or you've got access to people with interesting jobs, then you can sort of slot in to good work experience, but a lot of young people don't get that. So just it'd be good to do a piece of work around that, because I think work experience is really important. It's young people's first experience of what the working world is like, helps broaden horizons, raise confidence. So could we look at how we can break down barriers to good quality work experience, and how we can support maybe businesses and organisations in accepting young people, particularly those maybe who are more from disadvantaged backgrounds.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. And just to add on, Councillor Flint, and my apologies for earlier on. I was just thinking also if the, the scrutiny board could also look at perhaps maybe merging or learning from a program, that we in my ward have. It's called SPEAR program, that kind of like helps 16 to 24-year-olds that are, not in education and employment and training, and as well their mental health. They are one of, they're quite good in making sure that, this between 16 to 24-year-olds, improve into, getting work and perhaps also going back into higher education. So that would be something really great to look into that program, see how it can be merged into what Councillor Flint has just mentioned. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. It's just to pick up on the point, actually, as I mentioned in the pre-meet, I think it's not just parents from certain backgrounds. As I said in the pre-meet, I like to consider myself fairly well connected, solicitor by profession, and the challenge I faced helping my children get work experience, because businesses, firms, employers don't have the same appetite they used to allow people into the workplace, which with my education hat on, I get because of all the safeguarding pieces and the risk assessment. But I also wonder, years ago, as a council, we used to have schemes that allowed young people to come and do work experience here at the council. We don't anymore. And I just wonder, as part of, I think this is something I would encourage us to look at, this work experience piece, but whether not only we might be able to be an enabler, but whether we might as a council be able to be an example of best practice, because we're one of the city's largest employers. We do everything pretty much. And I just wonder, we've got a big legal, we've got a big, for somebody that wants to go to law, we've got finance, we've got childcare, we've got all sorts within the council. And I just wonder whether we might, as a council, be able to offer work as and I realise there's a resource element. Lots of councillors I know do a few days of work shadowing, but I just wonder whether there's something we can do there that actually puts it on a bit more of a formal footing. And actually, we say, well, actually, you can come and do a week's work experience that might involve a day with a counsellor, a day here, a day. I throw that out as part of it, but I think I would encourage that is something we look at this year. I think it's a really great idea. So thank you for that, Councillor Flynn and Councillor Monaco as well. Yeah, Andy.
Thank you very much. Just in terms of the health aspect, so I'm just looking here at the Leeds Health and Wellbeing Strategy 23 to 2030, and obviously in Scrutiny, one of the things we're meant to do is look at progress, and obviously that started last year. And to quote Councillor Venner, who's here actually, it says, to do this, we will focus on improving the health from preconception, birth and childhood through to the transition to adulthood. And that's just an aspect of a quote. But I guess I think it's really important to look at how that progress is moving forward. So right from preconception through to that difficult transition from childhood to adulthood. And I think we see that in many aspects, both in terms of health, whether that's like mental health services, which I know you are interested in, whether that transition works, whether you're in foster care, whether that transition works from being a child to an adult. And so I think looking at that progress as a piece, right from preconception to being an adult, would be a really positive thing to look at. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. Helen, Julie, anything you want to add to that to close the piece off?
I'm just, yeah, I think they're all very, very good ideas. In terms of early intervention with anxiety and all aspects of mental health and well-being, I think it's really important. Children can't afford to wait any time. They've got a limited childhood, so they limited time in that. So the more we can do, and I'd really welcome a piece across health on that as well. Really interesting in the work experience. When I was teaching, I was often a form tutor of years 10 and 11, and I'm really passionate about work experience. And I did see, because of the pressures on schools, it is a problem with the employers. You're absolutely right. Being able to have the capacity to take in young people and give them work experience, but it's also real pressure from schools that they can't afford the time that the children and young people are out of school, with the pressure on, getting results and things like that, and the curriculum time. What I always witnessed when I was teaching is that when they came back from work experience and went into year 11, because inevitably you did it in the summer of year 10, was a renewed sense that I'm not going to do that for the anytime soon. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to stay on at school because it's just too hard. So like, I really loved that getting up and getting to work and actually putting in a day's work is a lot harder than going to school and college. So, but it also gave young people kind of be more serious just what they were expected to do and what qualifications they needed to go and do, you know, and it gave them that renewed impetus into working really hard through year 11 to achieve what they needed to achieve in order. And it might have put them off that what they thought was going to be great. I didn't go into teaching for another 10 years because I really didn't like being in a primary school and my work experience. So it might put you off, but it gave me the knowledge that actually, yeah, I wanted to do teaching, but I didn't want to do the little ones. I wanted to do the older ones. So, you know, it gives you that kind of insider knowledge. But so I really would welcome a scrutiny inquiry in that. I think it'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, I think all of the suggestions that have been made this morning are really relevant. I think they're all significant issues which do have an impact on children and young people in the city. I think interestingly, you can see the link as well between the children and young people's 12 wishes and actually what they're saying is important to them. And I think some of the things that we've discussed this morning. I suppose just really thinking about schools, you know, around the curriculum, around some of the things that I'm sure we'll pick up later on this morning in terms of attendance, etc. And also just picking up on the life coach suggestion as well. I suppose I am thinking, you know, whether there is something around early help and family help. In terms of early intervention, you know, and ensuring that as a system that we are being effective in terms of identifying the needs of children, but then as a system, as a multi-agency partnership, responding to them collectively, because what we know is no one agency can respond or meet the needs of children on their own. So I do wonder whether there's something about, and I suppose, you know, early help, family help, it's got to be multi-agency, you know, and at an absolute minimum, you're talking about children's social care, you're talking about, you know, education, police, health, the voluntary sector. So I wonder whether there's something about perhaps having some themed discussions, whether it's health and CAMS, whether it's how we're supporting and working with our partners in schools, you know, whether it's police. We've got the joint targeted area inspection later on in today's agenda in terms of serious youth violence and child exploitation. So I wonder whether there's an umbrella in terms of family help and early help that we might then have some themed discussions, but just a suggestion. Thank you.
I think that's a really good suggestion, really helpful. We can kind of pull the strands out underneath that. Okay. Is everybody happy that we kind of turn that into something with some meat around those bones that we can then take for, it can be plant-based meat for those on a vegan diet, that we can take forward, and then obviously we'll focus on that as we go through the year. Yeah, is that okay? Excellent. Thank you very much. So moving on to item 10, which is youth vaping. Now, just we have had a discussion in the pre-meet on this. We are very mindful that we are expecting, whatever the outcome in a few weeks' time, we would hope and expect that this forms a key legislative issue. And therefore, we don't really plan to take a great deal on this today, because our idea is we will keep a watching brief before we move on with this. I am, however, mindful that a lot of people have turned up on this item, and it would be incredibly rude if we didn't invite you just to very briefly update, and I stress the very briefly bit, on the Leeds actions around youth vaping. And I will obviously give the board a moment also to comment after that. But really, we're not going to be dealing with this as a substantive item until we know the national legislative picture, because I don't want to do any duplication. That's not a good use of this board's time or officer time, which I'm really mindful of. So colleagues, please feel free. Thank you, Fiona.
Thank you, Chair. As I said in my introduction, I'm here in my new portfolio role of health, of equality, health and wellbeing. Chair, if it's okay with you, I wanted to just briefly say what a privilege it was to hold the Children and Families Executive Board portfolio for 5 years. It's an absolute privilege, and I think it's the most important work that the council does. And my view, having held that role for 5 years, is it's definitely the best and the worst portfolio. You know, the worst things that could happen in the city are in this portfolio, but also the cabinet member for children gets to do way more playing than any other cabinet member. I got to go to work twice dressed as a cat, which is probably the fulfillment of all my career goals. And I hope Helen loves the portfolio as much as I did. Scrutiny plays a really crucial role in what makes children's services outstanding in Leeds. When we had our ILACS inspection in 2022, this scrutiny board was singled out as being particularly effective, and scrutiny was highlighted as being robust. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. Although sometimes it's challenging for the exec member, it's always an opposition councillor who's in the chair, and that's deliberate. That was decided when we were inadequate, that we would always have that. So in the 10 years I've been a councillor, the chair's been held by the Conservatives and by the Lib Dems, but that's a principle of this scrutiny board. And also the number of co-opted members we have, I think, is a great strength, because we can be in a bit of a council bubble. And I think having people from so many different sectors is really important. So I know you will respect the gravity of what you're scrutinising this year, and I hope, Chair, that you have a really positive and a productive year. I'll move on to some brief comments about the vaping paper now. So as the Chair said, papers were brought on this in 2020, 23 to 24 municipal year, because there are really huge health concerns about children vaping. There have been some very serious health consequences, including and up to children dying. And there's very obvious blatant marketing of vapes at children. As the Chair said, legislation didn't go through due to the dissolution of Parliament, but because this has cross-party support, it is an expectation this will be in the next Parliament. So it's right that you're keeping it on the agenda for 24 to 25. There's a really clear public health message that if you're an adult smoker, vaping is safer than smoking. So there absolutely is a place for vapes to help people give up smoking cigarettes. But the problem is that lots of children are going straight onto vaping, not having ever smoked or considered smoking cigarettes, and becoming addicted to nicotine in that way. And so this paper outlines the enforcement work, the comms work, and also how, in the way that we do everything in Leeds, we're working very much in partnership. So the paper references work with other organisations such as the Rhinos and Leeds Festival in addressing this issue. But we will hopefully come back to you later in the municipal year after the election, when we know what's happening in Parliament. So I'll probably see you another time on this. Thank you, Chair.
Just to add a couple of stats to the comprehensive overview that Councillor Venn has provided. I was just interested in looking at see how the support for the bill was still continuing nationally. And modelling has recently been done by Action on Smoking and Health, which is the tobacco addressing charity. And they are suggesting that at the moment that nationally the support for the increase in the sale of tobacco and nicotine products is averaging at 69%, with a range of 57% to 75% within individual constituencies. We dug down a little bit later to see what the modelling in Leeds was, and in Leeds, support for the policy ranges across the constituencies from 68% to 70%. So that's very promising, with between only 11 and 12% 20% opposing. But I think interestingly, they also did some modelling with children's views, and 2/3 of children aged between 11 to 15, who would be the first generation that will be affected by the legislation, support the policy, with fewer than 1 in 10 opposing the policy. So we're confident that there's still, you know, the bill is still extremely important and has got high levels of support, both amongst the public and across health and wellbeing professionals. I think in terms of any further key actions to highlight from the report, I think Councillor Bennett's done a comprehensive overview. I think just to highlight what we've got actually coming up is that we will be continuing to work with Public Health and Healthy Schools, continuing to deliver the training, which is regularly updated to address the most current concerns, which are ever evolving in the world of vaping and young people. And we're also working with colleagues across the West Yorkshire region to sustain and ideally increase funding to maintain and uplift the capacity of cheap and illicit tobacco team to embed vaping and other new novel nicotine products. We need to be aware that vaping is our current issue, but we're also aware that there are other novel nicotine products that are being targeted at children and young people that are emerging on the market at the moment. And we are continuing to track vaping use across the schools through the My Health, My Schools programme. And we're also trying to start some new work with primary care to actually try to track what's happening within adults as well with vaping. So that will help us build up a more routine way to increase the intelligence that we have on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, mindful of the comments that we've made, I'm going to bring Councillor Scopes in. And then if colleagues do have any questions and comments, but I will reiterate, the aim of today is not really to take this as a substantive piece. It's brought as a bit of an update, and then we'll wait to see what legislation says. And obviously, if it doesn't meet the threshold that we would want to see, whoever's in power, then we'll absolutely, I would hope, want to run with this. Andy.
Yes, thank you very much, Councillor Curran. My only comment is that given there are elections on the 4th of July, I think it's very important for us to keep this on the agenda. So my plea would be for you to rewrite to the relevant minister once that's known, with both the stuff you said in your letter back in May, not that long ago, but also all the recommendations we made when we looked at this more substantively earlier in the last municipal year. So just encourage you to send a reminder letter to the relevant MP when appropriate. Thank you.
I think it's been suggested by, I can't remember who suggested it, but we wrote a number of letters over the course of last year. I think it would probably be a good idea to, whatever the outcome of 4th of July, is that we rewrite all of those letters to the relevant ministers, whoever they may be, across the piece. So remember, we did an EHCP one, we did one on this, I think we did 3 over the year. So my view would be we would resend all of those. For that, I'm pleased to see nods. That helps. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I think it's important also, we just do know, thanks to Councillor Sandy Lay, who was the councillor that in the first instance, particularly because of his medical background, was really keen that we looked at this as a board, and has been keen that we've kept this on the agenda, and I have kept him, tried to keep him up to date with where we are on it as well. So I just want to note thanks to Sandy. Okay, thank you for that. Moves us then to
It's through you, Chair. Could I just raise the issue of nitrous oxide as a sort of a craze that I'm aware of in my community, in my ward. So it's similar to vaping to a degree, because it becomes a sort of like a craze almost. So I just wondered if public health could look into that as well, which I've raised already. But
thank you.
You mentioned education as well, and I think once we know who's the minister, if we can include something around education, because I think I hang out with teenagers a lot, having some of my own, and my 16-year-old is like, oh, vaping's something they do in year 7 and 8, and it's just making sure that the education happens early enough so that kids are informed about the risks. And I think often education happens too late when kids are already really involved. So I know there's something in the report mentions about years 5 to 7, but it'd be interesting to know when the education happens in school, and that our ask is that it happens early enough.
Yes, just noting a recent increase in vape shops. I know residents in Headingley are particularly concerned about that, and that's adding to publicity because kids are going to be walking past those every day. Obviously, the legislation might deal with that, but I just want that to be something we're bearing in mind when we're thinking about what we can do as a council.
Yeah, just to reiterate, thank you for that, and absolutely valid. And we'll make sure all those elements. What I don't want to do is start trying to, because we'll start dealing with it as a substantive item now. So if we can make sure those things are noted, and we will make sure when it comes back, those things are taken forward. Obviously, if it becomes, as we hope, legislated against, everything will follow through from that, and the depth of the education and the action will all follow from the strength of the legislation. Okay, Ollie, last comment.
Very quickly, and just to put it on the record, it doesn't necessarily need a response now, but one issue around vaping as well does seem, at least not just from my experience, but also residents have also raised it with me, there does seem to be quite a lot of vaping on buses and trains as well. Within some sections of the community, it seems to have achieved a level of acceptance that you wouldn't have, for example, with cigarettes. And so I'm not necessarily pushing for a response right now, but it's something from an enforcement point of view that we should be mindful of, because it does seem to be a growing issue and some people seem to think it's okay.
Thank you for that. Just actually, it would be helpful just get a response. I know smoking on public transport is unlawful. Is vaping covered in the same? No, I can see shaking of the heads. So, because often signs say no vaping, but I didn't think the law did apply in the same way. Okay, that's helpful to know. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, item 11. Thank you, colleagues. Sorry for bringing you for a short piece, but you've got a whole chunk of it. You've been given the gift of time. Item 11, performance report for the financial year 24-25. Who is going to, Julie, are you going to kick us off on this? I'm flexible.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the first performance update of the 24-25 financial year, set against the Children and Young People's Plan, and really our ambition for children and young people in Leeds. It does provide the latest performance information showing progress against the measures in the Children and Young People's Plan at both a city and a cluster level. The update really focuses on the 3 obsessions that we've got in our Children and Young People's Plan. It also gives finalised key stage attainment data for 2023 and the latest attendance data and an update in relation to education, health and care plans and the processes that surround that. In addition, which I think is significant, it summarises changes in the Leeds under 18 population. And that really gives some context to some of the other information that is included in the report. The board is asked to consider and comment on the information in the report and the appendices, of which there are a number, noting the assurance which is provided, but also considering if there's any additional information or whether we would benefit from additional scrutiny in any of the areas that's covered. Thank you very much, Chair.
Genuinely no pressure. Councillor Hayden, anything you want to add at this moment, or do you want to just wait for the debate?
May I wait for the debate, please? And then I'll maybe sum up at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie, before we move on to comments and questions, are there particular areas within this report that are a concern, particular area of concern for you and senior colleagues, and where there may be what your methodology and plans are to address some of those?
Yeah, there are. I mean, I think it's self-explanatory when people read the report. I think there's a number of continuous challenges that we're seeing in the city. I think some of which we've already touched on earlier in the meeting. I think perhaps where I would start is the impact of poverty actually, and the continuing impact of the pandemic actually on children and families, and whether that's mental health, as we've talked about, and then the knock-on effect in terms of demand on our CAMS and health services. I suppose the impact of poverty, I think the report sets out that we've now got 44% of Leeds pupils who live in the most 20% deprived localities in the city. And I just think the impact of that on children and families. The increase in the numbers of children looked after, but again, I think research has set out that direct correlation between children living in poverty and then the likelihood of children experiencing abuse and neglect. I think the report sets out that if you are a child living in the 20% most deprived areas in this city, then you're 5.5 times more likely to become a child looked after. When you look at the most 10% deprived areas of the city, that increases to 9. You're 9 times more likely to become a child looked after. So you can see the direct correlation between poverty and also some of the other issues that we've talked about, and the numbers of children becoming looked after. We've talked here previously, Josh McAllister has set out in his national review the broken system and the challenges that we do have in terms of finding appropriate placements for children, especially the increase in children, adolescents in particular, who are requiring residential care, and the broken market that we have in terms of external residential care and the cost of that. So as was set out in Josh McAllister's review, as we know nationally, regionally, locally, we have more children in external residential care than ever before, certainly more than we would like in Leeds. The outcomes have never been poorer and the cost has never been higher. So we have a real challenge and a priority in terms of rebalancing that system. We've already talked earlier this morning, I suppose, about some of the impacts on our schools, non-education, so thinking about attendance, thinking about suspension rates, which again are highlighted in the report. And then we have our increased demand in terms of children in the city who do have special educational needs and disability. And the report sets out, the huge increase in demand that we've had in the city, and the fact that, as we've discussed here, on numerous occasions, the work that we're doing in terms of an improvement plan to ensure that we are able to meet the needs of those children and their families in a timely way, and in a way which fulfills our statutory duty. So perhaps there's some of the highlights that I would make at this point, Chair.
Thank you, Tony.
On page 93 of the pack, you say children looked after children. How many of those 1,548 are actually looked after in the city, and how many are looked after outside the city?
Thank you. That's a really important question. Actually, in terms of our own provision, Leeds compares really, really well with all comparators, whether that's core cities or our stat neighbours. So as an example, in Leeds, we have 64% of children are in our own internal provision, and that compares with core cities of 49.6%, our statutory neighbours 49.3%, and nationally 44%. So whilst we do have, those continuous challenges, actually what you can see there is that the majority of children who are in care in Leeds are in our own provision.
How many of the 101 extra are in our city?
So I didn't quite hear that question, sorry.
So the numbers have gone up by 101. How many of those are actually in the city, or are they outside the city, or what?
I think I'll bring Chris in because I think I can see that he wants to come in at this point, and then I might come in on the back of what Chris has to say.
Thank you. I couldn't give you an exact number, but generally we would say anywhere between 60 and 70% of children who are looked after in Leeds are placed somewhere within the Leeds boundary. And you find of the remaining 20-30% that are placed outside Leeds, they're often in perhaps more specialist
placements that just are not available in the Leeds boundary. But it does vary depending on the reason that the young person has come into care and what level of additional support they require.
So I'd perhaps just add as well that in terms of our sufficiency strategy, so, every local authority has got a duty to ensure that we have sufficient placements and the right mix of placements for the children that we need to look after. Part of our sufficiency strategy is very much about increasing our own provision. So increasing the numbers of our own foster carers, increasing the numbers of our small group residential children's homes. And that absolutely is about keeping Leeds children in Leeds. So, that's a principle and a value base that runs throughout everything that we do.
Thank you for that. Andy, Councillor Scopes.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, so I'm conscious that talking about EHCP is scheduled in September, so I encourage you to keep that in place. But in the meantime, I look on page 109 of the pack, and in 2023, 8.4% of EHC plans were issued within 20 weeks. I can see there's an improvement in the first quarter of 2024, but I guess how are we going to get closer to 100% would be my initial question. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's a historic context to this, having reduced significantly and gradually over time. We spoke at one of the previous scrutiny boards about the work that PwC had been doing with us around putting in place a plan to remedy that. It's obviously complex. We have a backlog of cases which will ultimately limit our timeliness until we remove the backlog, and we have a plan in place to remove that backlog within the next 5 months. So we should start to see an improvement to the timeliness figures. They won't be instantaneous because you have a 20-week statutory period. So we would start to see that gradually changing over that period. So there's a specific answer to the question around timeliness. There are lots of dependencies in terms of our staff team, whether it's fully recruited to and everything else. But ultimately, with a fair wind and everything else remaining equal, that should start to change within the next 5 months, as I've said.
It would be useful just to have a bit more perspective around. So as Councillor Scopes has pointed out, we know we're missing that 20-week deadline, but how far over? And that would be really helpful information. So what percentage is it? 30 weeks, 40 weeks? I know some of it is significantly over. So it would be useful to have some transparency actually around that. I know you won't necessarily have it to hand, but can we have that please as a something that I can share with the board? What is it? It's a bit like, when you get an invoice that might have been paid late, it tells you how late. Where are we? If you could perhaps build it into by weeks. You don't expect it now, so we can see on one sheet, as it were. Well, the latest is 100 weeks late. I hope nothing's at that, but I suspect something might be.
Yes, Chair, we can certainly do that. I suppose part of the work that we've been doing is to really understand the process and understand that 20-week process and where we've got particular pressure points. What we can see is the pressure points are certainly around the role that the educational psychologists have in terms of providing their assessment as part of the EHCP process. The other pressure point, as you can imagine, is finalising and actually writing up the plans, because, with that huge increase in demand and huge increase in the number of plans that we're issuing. So what we're really doing, I suppose just trying to give some of the detail as an example, are really focusing on those two areas in particular. And we've brought in additional resource in order for us to be able to meet that demand in a more timely way. But we can certainly provide the detail that you've requested.
Sorry, it's just important that I mention, because the narrative is around, failing to meet our statutory deadlines. That doesn't mean that the team isn't being productive, but there is just the sheer volume of applications and requests that's the problem. And I just wanted to flag, and I know this is, I think, part of the report anyway, but the number of final assessments that we produced last year is the biggest we've ever done. So even though we are struggling in terms of timeliness, we are still generating in terms of pure output more than we've previously done. And I think it's just important. There'll probably be some members of the team who are watching this, but we know that they are doing it as well as they can. It's about us enabling them structurally and with the various different support services that help in terms of our best use of IT and other things to help them to continue to improve. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. That's really helpful. I guess two follow-ups, if that's okay. So the first one is around proposed changes to FFI funding. And I know that's, so September, just doing the maths in my head, I think that's 3 months away. And so there's a concern from certainly my perspective as a school governor around that crossover time, particularly children in school and the speed of which they'll get new funding. Obviously, you've given assurances that existing FFI is different, but for new assessments, I think that's a real concern. And I guess the second one, if you go to concern I'd like to raise, if you go to page 158 of our pack, I think says just 43% of children with an EHCP were in receipt of the full offer. So I think there's also a challenge that even once we've got the HC in place, there's a challenge around enough appropriate provision. So I think that's another angle which is really important, and hopefully you'll be able to cover this in much more detail in September. But I think that if that backlog's still significant in September when FFI changes are coming through, that'd be deeply concerning for me. Thank you.
Sorry, it might be helpful as part of this answer if you just very briefly, for colleagues that may not be fully up to speed or may not be aware because they're not dealing with it on a day-to-day, just the FFI changes and what's altered from September.
Yeah, happy to do that. So as part of our plan, we are going to gradually migrate away from FFI, which means funding for inclusion, which is a way differently from EHCPs for providing funding to meet educational need in schools. We need to be very careful about how we do that and when we do that, so that, as Councillor Scopes has pointed out, we don't effectively create a snowball effect that completely means that we can't function as a team. So we've got to be very careful about how we prioritise which of the FFI transitions need to happen first and why. And we need to make sure that we do that in a planned way, working with schools, so that we know that we will have the capacity within the team to transition to EHCPs where appropriate and not to create a gap in provision. So we're working at the moment, the FFI team and schools, to identify a very carefully prioritised list of which children need to be put first into that kind of machine to process those changes. What we won't do, albeit that there is an absolute imperative which is very clear that we must move away from that system, we won't tip everybody into that process all at the same time, because we wouldn't be able to cope with that level of demand. So where we have to, we will continue to fund existing FFI packages until we know that we can safely transition from one to the other. That's about prioritising children and their provision. If they're in receipt of provision at the moment at school, we're not going to disrupt that until such time as we know that we can safely transition across. So that was a bit around the FFI piece. The other one was around provision itself, I think, and we are at the moment working on scoping what a strategic plan will look like in terms of creating additional places where we will need them. This is at very early stages at the moment, but we anticipate in the autumn speaking to mainstream schools and also other partners around what the offer might be and where it might need to be. So there will be a strategic approach to that going forward.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Dan. It's really reassuring. And I guess just on a practical note, there's a lot of typically mums who speak to me about their children and the concerns. So whilst it's quite a dry topic here for in this room, and we should be treating it as a really serious topic, it's quite an emotional and quite difficult topic when you're your child may be out of provision on a reduced timetable, even primary school children. And as a parent, you're at home with those challenges. And so I think there's a real that need is really high and really well felt, strongly felt by parents certainly in my ward. And just one other thing around peer support groups. There's a new peer support group in my ward, and I think that sort of thing, if there's a way we can link those together a bit better. So Centastic, which meets at St Luke's at Holbeck, is a really good example of where actually parents are gathering together and saying, actually, we are all facing challenges, and there are challenges that are more peer support need. And so I think that's a really positive thing if we can do anything to advocate for more of those or support those groups that exist. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. I mean, I cannot stress enough that you know how much of a priority this is for us as a Children and Families Directorate. Dan and I met with the Parent Carer Forum just a few weeks ago, and actually in that meeting, you know, and I suppose, you know, listening to the parents and carers in that meeting, listening to the impact on them, you know, if we weren't aware before, which we absolutely were, you know, I think you can't be in those meetings and hear from those parents and carers without being affected personally and professionally, and quite rightly so. So we are absolutely driven and committed to making sure that we make the improvements that we need to be for the children and also for the parents and carers. I think for me, you know, it goes back to early intervention and prevention and the conversation that we touched on earlier in terms of early help and family help. And when I'm listening to parents and carers through my own personal experience, you know, I think what's really highlighted is the need for emerging issues, emerging need to be identified at an earliest opportunity as possible. You know, if we're thinking about FFI, actually the principle behind FFI was a really good principle, and it was about being able to support schools, you know, provide funding to meet the needs of those children at the earliest opportunity. And we mustn't move away from that principle. So when we're having conversations now around what does family help look like, what does early help, how can we bolster and improve our early help, absolutely, you know, the needs of children with special educational needs and disability and the needs of their parents and carers are featuring large in that. So certainly even some of the things that we've heard at our recent meeting are shaping and influencing how we will be developing those services. So when parents and carers are telling us actually we really struggle to navigate the system, you know, we would just like a single point of contact where if we've got any queries we can go. All of those things are feeding into, you know, our vision and our plans for what early help and family help needs to look like in this city.
Thank you. I am making notes of people who are indicating. So I will make a note. I'm going to bring Councillor Edwards in a second, but is there anybody else? Just we're on the theme, and I'm conscious I don't want to. It's helpful if is there anybody? Thank you.
I just want to say, I know we have had lots of conversations, but the systems are so fragmented. And we're talking about early help. It seems to be it's a one size fits all. When you come to somebody and say, we need help, oh, well, you need this. I can tell you now, we don't need that. That is not what our family needs. But that's what we can offer. So you have to go to a 20-week programme with MST. It's not for our families, it don't work. It works for some, but some of our families got an added layer of being adopted, which is a whole different ball game. So nobody's actually, I know we are now, but nobody's listening to families when we say we need help. And they can say, oh, we can offer this. And we know that this isn't going to work because we know what our children are like. And we know that we've got this in place and that in place. People need to start listening to us. And I think at Leeds as a whole, we need to know what services we actually offer and how we're offering it. And I don't think we're getting that right, even with like all the PAs. We're offering it, but actually there's a much better way of using a PA service than just giving somebody 21 hours. There you go, there's a fellow that comes along, in principle, it's good and it'll work for some children, but just not for anybody. So we just need to start looking at it much, much earlier. Thank you.
Julie.
And I couldn't agree with you more. And we use words, don't we, in our reports about co-production, collaboration, but essentially what that means is listening to parents and carers, listening to children, and developing your service in response to what you are hearing. We cannot have a computer says no approach. That is not what we're about. We've got to work with parents and carers, with children, and we've got to shape our service, and there's got to be flexibility. We're all different, every child's different, every family's different, and we've got to have that flexibility. But what drives that is culture, in my experience. What drives that is a practice which is underpinned by values and principles. Again, we're talking about working with families, but that means respecting every child as an individual, listening, being prepared to listen, and we will absolutely have those principles, at the core of everything that we're doing.
We feel as well you're wasting so much money because you're throwing services at us that are wrong. And it's just that this is your list, this is what will go down, and this is what we'll throw at you. And it's a complete waste of money. And if you put the right service in earlier, you just save yourself a fortune.
So just jump in. Sorry.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Sorry. Yeah, I like to do as I'm told. But yeah, I really hear what you're saying. I also, as a mother of and as parents of a child with an ASD diagnosis, we never, and I'm in a kind of privileged position as a council at Leeds City Council. I mean, I wasn't in charge of, but I have very little idea about what services are actually out there. And Richie's dad would look to me to say, well, come on, what's out there? And even in this position, I don't know what's available. So we need to get it. You also feel a little bit like this is a diagnosis, and because he wasn't like along the diagnosis wouldn't entitle him to an EHCP or anything like. We were kind of like, this is the diagnosis, and the school knew what they were doing, and actually the diagnosis didn't change how they dealt with Richie and how they helped and supported him, and which they did a fantastic job. But us as parents, it was like, well, what can we do? And you do feel left to a certain extent to find out for yourself, and that needs to change for children of all across the spectrum. I am aware that if it's certain diagnoses, then certain things are put in place, especially around, but then we're only meeting 50% of the EHCP. So I am very determined that we do listen to families, but that families are encouraged to actually speak up and say, what is there? And, because as parents, we do want to best support our child. We just need the information, and we need to know exactly what is out there in order to do so.
It's how we shine that brightest possible light onto the local offer, isn't it? And it's not always the easiest. Yeah, feel free.
And we talk about education a lot and how it helps education, and that is beyond massive. But actually, it's what you can do for the home life as well, because that's even bigger.
And I think whilst it's absolutely right to focus, as we are currently, on timeliness, and ensuring that we are producing our plans in line with our statutory responsibility, we can't lose sight of the quality, because you can have your timeliness, but actually if the plan's not really effective, and if it doesn't really reflect all of the things that Maria's saying in terms of that individual child, that individual family, then in some ways it's meaningless, So again, that's why listening, responding to the needs, of individual children and families is absolutely key. And we've heard a number of times now, really just of the struggles that parents and carers in particular do have in terms of navigating the system, as Councillor Scope's point, in terms of different support groups, really understanding and being aware of what does exist in the city. It's always a challenge, especially in a city the size of Leeds, but that's something that we've really taken on board. Thank you.
I just want to build in so it's kind of in our mind's eye as well. It isn't just the EHCP, but it's the initial EHCP. It's also that review process, because all too often, I know in our own case, we often get Joshua's review back literally as we're due for the next review. Well, that's in some cases afterwards. Well, it's like a chocolate fire guard, isn't it? So it's making sure that we take it as read that it's a quality plan. It's not just there to tick a box, but the timeliness really matters, because so much flows from the timeliness. Just so everyone knows who I've got noted on my list in order at the moment. I have Ollie, Billy, Jules, and Kaylee, Karen. Are any of you wanting to speak specifically on this? Right, in that case, because it's just helpful to be thematic. So, Jules, I'll bring you in now, and then.
It was really what Councillor Scope said about parent groups and how we connect those and bring those together. In my role as councillor, I've worked with some SEND groups and around the city, and it would be good for everybody to talk to each other about exactly what the offer is and how we can all help each other. But also, as a parent in a similar situation to Councillor Hayden, who had a young teenager without a diagnosis, I know how difficult that is, and dealing with that at home. And sometimes you just need to speak to another parent to think, is it just me? Is it just my child? Is it just my home life that's like this? Or what, once we got the diagnosis, things did get, we haven't got an EHCP like Councillor Hayden, but things do get easier once you get your diagnosis, because then for us, because my daughter then understood what it was and we could work through things. So I think we really do need to bring these groups together, because sometimes you just need to have those chats with people. You just need to know what's out there, who you can talk to, and bring those groups together so we all know what's on offer and what we can do as a city, definitely.
And of course, we can't just invite everybody to our scrutiny board, which is, of course, everyone can watch it. Ollie.
Thank you very much. There have been some very powerful points, and I think especially around the experience of parents and carers. I can't really articulate those better than you've already done so. Just a bit of feedback for the team. I do think that obviously this is incredibly stressful for parents and carers. I do also acknowledge on the other side that for the staff who are working with this, and it's also challenging task that they have to do. The system is not working well enough at the moment for parents and carers, and I recognise that staff are also probably bearing the brunt of that. Would it be helpful to think about when people are going through that process, thinking about some of the messaging for parents? It's not going to tell parents what they want to hear, or carers what they want to hear, but at least giving people a realistic idea about how long it might take, and also what support they can access in the meantime. Because I think one of the concerns, and in fact I emailed you only this morning about a parent and her daughter in my ward. I think one of the issues that comes up quite often is that people just don't know how long it's going to take. They email, but they feel that they're not getting any kind of response. And so even if we're not able to tell people what they want to hear, at least giving them an idea of where they are, so we can manage expectations, I think would be better than nothing. But the questions I wanted to ask were on page 94. So two topics. So one of them around children in care. So I think that statistic around children living in the most deprived areas being disproportionately more likely to come into care is a really important one. And when we look at issues around the cost of living, and the impact that that's having on families, that's not a surprise. I think some of the work around internal provision is excellent. I've been working with Ben, who is behind the pillar. I can't see him and he can't see me, but some of the work that is being done there is outstanding. I think particularly around some of the children's homes, some of the work around fostering. And I would encourage people, especially new members, if you have the opportunity to visit children's homes, some of the children's homes, and see some of the work that's being done. It is outstanding. It would be quite interesting to know about the number or the proportion of children returning to families, so children who are going through the internal provision. I note that there's been an increase in the number of children coming into care, but also the children going through some of our internal provision. What are the proportions or numbers of those children ultimately returning to their families, which is the preferred option in most cases? So that would be interesting to know about. And also in terms of young people's attendance, looking at absences, and we talked earlier on about some of the issues around mental health. So as I understand the figures on page 94, it seems that there's been a decrease in the number of not knowns, children and young people with not known status, but an increase in the number of children not in education, employment, or training. So in terms of the numbers of not knowns going down, I understand from that we know more. So what were the issues there in terms of the not knowns, as we know more about the not knowns? Sorry, that wasn't the most articulate sentence. We won't get into known unknowns and all the rest of it. But I mean, when we look at the not known data, what were the findings from that?
So just in terms of the not knowns, I mean, the reason that we're moving to a space where we have more clarity and more certainty around the scale of the challenge with NEET is about our improving relationship with settings. So there's teams across the board around, you know, the youth service and pathways teams who are more proactive and are working very hard to seek out that information. So there is something just about the way we work better with our settings, particularly around the sort of end of year 11 September guarantee point in time, where we are just getting better at identifying and then chasing that up over the course of the autumn term and the early spring term. So it's always a journey, but the better we can understand who the children are who are NEET rather than not known, the better we can then target, as we do, intensive support for those children who might be otherwise outside of education, employment, or training, and support them and encourage them to take up offers. So there is the answer to that last question is around the way that we work with our settings and then continue to track children. There was a bit about messaging right at the beginning, which is probably worth picking up because it's a great idea. Ultimately, that void of information and communication that parents and carers at home have when they're in the process and there's nothing coming out enormously adds to frustration. So even if we're giving a difficult message, we must, and at least continue to do that in a proactive way so that people aren't left in that sort of void of information. So that's certainly part of what we're trying to do, but we need to do better. So we'll definitely take that on board. I'll leave the CLA question for Julie or Farah.
Just in relation to children returning to family, we continue to have a large proportion of our foster carers, kinship carers, one of the largest kinship carers group in the country. I can't access the numbers, my actual system isn't working correctly, but we continue to have a large number of kinship carers who, where children can't remain with their parents, they're able to remain with, they're able to move to family arrangements. We also strengthened our special guardianship offer, so that's where children who are looked after, who are with kinship carers, that they don't remain looked after for longer than necessary, so they can still access the financial support that would otherwise be a barrier to family caring for children. Dan and I, although I'm responsible for social care, Dan for education, we've been working more closely together on the preventative offer, but also for children looked after, to look at where there are specific areas around education, around SEND, where we work together with our most vulnerable children. Some of that's through the SEND Partnership Board, but outside of that as well, it's the same children often. And so that focus on preventative in relation to accessing services, people being able to be clearer on what services are available, and then looking at when we're returning children. We've had a recent investment, Invest to Save, in a specific team called a reunification team. So that's a team of social workers who are working within our placement support service to identify children where there's a specific piece of work and assessment looking at what support is needed for those children to go home. And so, there's a real intense focus on that, recognising that we need to continue to work on that, how we return children. I guess for me, the just thinking about early help and family help, we recognise there's a lot of services in Leeds. We're quite privileged in that we still have a lot of services, but those services can be a minefield for practitioners and for parents to work through. I'm excited about the discussion at the beginning when we were setting the agenda, what to bring back here, because I think we can cover that in family help and early help. And I think SEND is a key part of that, about how we look at that menu of support for almost like one point of access for parents, where we avoid that escalation into statutory social work and be able to support at the earliest possible opportunity. And there's we're more focused on a cross-directorate approach to that. So feedback from the SEND Partnership Board, from engagement with the parents group, social care are involved in that as well. So I just wanted to reassure our panel that it's a joint approach to that work.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think I'd probably just like to go back to some of the information that we shared at the beginning of this discussion around context and our youth population in the city, and the fact that we have had an increase in terms of our localities that are classed as being some of the highest deprived areas in the country, but also the increase in particular of adolescents living in those deprived areas. And then we can absolutely see the correlation between more areas of highest deprivation, more adolescents living in those areas of highest deprivation, and then more adolescents coming into care. I think ordinarily we have 70% of our children looked after population are children who live in those areas of highest deprivation. In 2023, we had a 20% increase in terms of our children looked after who were from those areas of highest deprivation. If you look at our children who came into care in 2023, the highest cohorts are adolescents and still babies under 1. So again, we're looking at have a really targeted approach, a lot of work in terms of our offer and our response to adolescents and their families, but also that focus on children under 1. So we have a really valuable service in the city called Futures, and that service works with supports young parents in the main under 25 who have had their first child removed. And what we know is if you've had your first child removed, you're much more likely to go on, sadly, tragically, to have a second, a third, a fourth child removed. But we have a wealth of learning, again, working with those parents who tragically have had their first child removed, to listen to them, to know actually what would make a difference, what might have made a difference. So again, ploughing all of that feedback into shaping our current services. So a real focus in terms of reunification, in terms of those adolescents in particular. Thank you.
We're going to have to move on about. I'm just a little cautious of time, just so everyone knows where, because I've made a note of people's names. So I'm going to bring Billy Councillor Flynn next. I've got Kaylee, I've got Karen, Jordan, Emma, and then last comment will come from Maria. So I'm just conscious of trying to make sure that we finish before evening. Billy, thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Julie, this is more strategic than specific. And I think it's more comment, or I think there's a question in there somewhere, but you'll probably be better telling me sort of later on. I appreciate that Children and Families is a demand-led business and you have limited control over what comes through the front door. Surprised to see the performance management and financial health monitoring isn't on the agenda again until next January, although I'm sure you'll be talking about things sort of in between times. And in the key risks that you've listed on page 91, glad to see that you have at least listed them. Most directorates don't. You haven't mentioned the budget gap, which is critical to sort of every directorate basically and everything that you do, I would imagine. You've mentioned in the report that there are a number of service reviews in Children and Family, but is there a business transformation plan, i.e. looking at the entire directorate and the way you deliver the business? And more importantly, if you have, or even on the service reviews that you're carrying out, what are the effects or the measurable effects on children and their families?
Thank you. So we do have what we call a delivery board, which really oversees our transformation. So we absolutely recognise, we're in 2024, the challenging issues that we have do require transformation. We've talked about some of that already in terms of practice, approaches to practice, also our sufficiency strategy as an example, in terms of ensuring that we've got the right menu, the right mix of placements for children, and that wherever possible, they're local placements for local children so we can keep our children in Leeds. In terms of the finance and the financial pressures that we have, in the main, they are derived from the numbers of children looked after and the increase in particular that we've talked about in terms of adolescents. I'm not going to reiterate, again, some of the demography that we've got in terms of increased number of adolescents in the city and those living in the highest area of deprivation. But absolutely central to that is the cost of external residential placements, and the fact that, as I've already said, that's a broken market and we've got very little, very little control over that locally, other than to look at a strategic level, which you've referred to, about our sufficiency strategy and actually what's within our gift. So the other area that we've talked about already in terms of a significant financial pressure does relate to the number of children in the city who do receive transport. And again, there's a correlation there between the increased demand for children with special education needs and disability, children who do have an EHCP plan, and children who then have transport associated with that. So we do have a delivery board. I chair that board. We meet monthly. There's a number of work streams that report into that board. We've talked about that here previously. We've also reported that to the exec board. In addition to that, I do meet monthly. We have a member oversight group. We normally meet after exec board where we talk about the delivery board, talk about the transformation work programmes. So there is real detailed scrutiny, as you would expect. In terms of outcomes, I suppose what we've talked about here this morning in terms of our improvement plan linked to children with special education needs and disability, talked about our sufficiency strategy. There's a number of strategic work that's set out in those and some really key targets and milestones associated with those. So I suppose to assure you, I hope I'm assuring you that that is in place. There's a real clear framework around that. First and foremost, it's about achieving outcomes for children and families, and we recognise, and we've recognised in Leeds since 2009, 2010, since we've been on our journey of improvement, that essentially if we get the practice right, if we achieve the right outcomes for children, if we keep more children at home, if we keep more children with kin, if we keep more children in the city, the financial outcomes follow, and that's what we will continue to do.
I may have missed it. Julie, but I was thinking more in terms of if you have a major transformation plan for the entire business rather than looking at each individual sort of bit this year, next year, the year after. And if you have, you know, I'm sure you will have considered the effects on children and families, but I'm not suggesting for a moment they should reduce them. Far from it, just the opposite, in fact. But how you actually square the circle between, you know, transforming the business, providing a service, and yet, you know, making savings.
Yeah, so I suppose we have our overarching strategy. I mean, you know, Children and Young People's Plan is the strategy. It's a successful strategy. And then within that, we, as I've said, we have a number of work streams and strategic plans to respond to the particular challenges that we know we have in the city. So as an example, the sufficiency strategy runs until 2027. So it's not just about the here and the now. You know, all of those work streams are, you know, immediate, medium, long-term plans and strategies.
Okay. Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Just, I guess I wanted to add on what Councillor Scope and Councillor Hazelwood mentioned with regard to parent groups and the single point of contact. Perhaps maybe there may be some suggestions as to, as well, maybe whilst parents are waiting with, you know, knowing when the EHCP will go through, maybe that single point of contact could be something that they could kind of like go to and know, you know, get some information there. I would also suggest under the single point of contact regards to parents that English is not their you know, their first language. I've got a lot of those in my ward. They are just so confused. They literally do not know that you know, there is a team that's now representing them even within the council. You know, they've got a lot that they don't know. They just live at home with their children. All they're waiting for is a doctor's appointment and a specialist appointment. So that would be great to see that single point of contact coming through. It will really work well, especially I would say in my ward. As we all are aware, my ward is one of the most deprived. And, you know, I'm looking forward to this, really. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Very briefly.
Yeah, just wanted to say that what you've just said there about language and the ability to understand the process if you don't have English as a mother tongue or you have other difficulties, that is something which I, as part of my visits to schools across the city over the last 6 months, I've heard reflected back at me, particularly in some of the areas that you're talking about. So it's very much part of our thinking at the moment. How do we get the easy win, and whether that's just commissioning translation, but there's something about home language literacy as well. So it's not just about translating into a different language, it's about being able to interpret and have a conversation about what's going on. So watch this space on that one, but it's something that we're hearing a lot of.
Aaron.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from some of the issues that have already been raised, and that's early help and family help. And I just wondered if how you actually encourage parents who totally feel isolated, they won't go to other groups because they think it's only their child. It's only my child that has got this condition and it's my fault. They always blame themselves. Through working in a nursery, I'm quite aware of how individual they feel, as if it's just them. And if they do go to parent groups, quite often if their child is not making good choices, they feel it's because of them and not the condition of the child or any of the things that come along with that. So I just wondered if, regarding restorative practice, that probably won't work for some children, if that was done in all schools still, and what individualisation programmes are in place, and how many parent groups have we actually got throughout the city? Because in my ward, I don't know of any, apart from some schools that put on a parent coffee morning, but that's while the child is being in school. And then there's the long holidays when the parent is with that child 24/7 and under, you know, huge stress of knowing what they should do next. Is there anywhere for them to go? Are there places for their children specifically? So I just wondered if you could touch on that slightly. Thank you.
Thank you. It really speaks to the conversations that I've been having over the course of my time in Leeds about how lonely and isolating it can feel when you're a parent of a child with that sort of additional need. This is about communication. So we have to get better at making sure that we take the easy win. You know, there's lots of this which is really difficult, and there's no money to put extra stuff in the system, but this is just about sharing with families in a proactive way what is available, and it's about signposting. And Councillor Cohen talked about the local offer, you know, earlier on. So part of what we want to do better is communication. It's one of the transcending themes of the recently reconvened SEND Partnership Board that Farah was talking about. So we absolutely will develop a better way of communicating. The great thing is that there are so many brilliant parents and carers in the city who have taken it upon themselves to set up these groups. And when Julie and I met with one of them just the other day, you know, they're great and they're an invaluable source of support. So we need to do everything we can to make sure that everybody who needs to know about them does, and we will. In terms of what happens in schools, there is variation across the city, as there always will be in any sort of network. This is about system leadership. Where we think there's something good going on, we need to share it and encourage schools to work together to understand how best to support children and families. And you know, we did have a really good system up until quite recently in terms of holiday activities and food programme, where there were lots of things that are available. We will publish anyway what's available ahead of the summer holidays. But you're right, you know, school is really important, but it is actually a form of respite sometimes when children are away and being educated. It gives people a bit of a breathing space. So we recognise that the summer holidays are really challenging.
I just wondered as well if there were any ways of identifying those who are isolated, because some parents, you know, just take themselves home because they feel they're causing that disruption, and they're finishing up isolated, and so when these messages come out, they haven't got the confidence to go along to these groups, which are amazing when they're up and running. But it's how do you get round to encouraging the parents to actually go into them?
And I think that's the work that we have to do. And I think all too often this is couched in terms of families being hard to reach. Well, that's not fair or right. It's our job. We you know, it's not the family's fault. And I think quite often the way that we talk about it nationally ends up blaming families for being hard to reach. Well, actually, what they have is really difficult circumstances. And it's for us, in partnership with the Parent Carer Forum and those other groups, to create different ways of accessing support. So if it's about smaller groups, if it's about online, it's about different times of day, and we need to work to make sure that we prioritise families where we think they might be being isolated. It's a system piece of work, but I think you're absolutely right to highlight it.
Thank you. Thank you. Jordan.
Yes, to talk about the obsession of the Children and Young People's Plan, the obsession one, obviously the work that we've been doing about, you know, safely and appropriately reduce the number of children looked after, but also I think just sort of emphasising the two really great pieces of work that got brought to scrutiny last year. And overall, it was that the impact of poverty, which obviously seems to have just an absolute impact of on lots of different aspects of children's education. And despite, you know, the alleviation that we can do as a council, that frustration that we've got, that there's still a huge amount that it's incredibly difficult to reduce the sort of deprivation that's happening. But I guess on the other piece that I think, you know, a lot of members were kind of really shocked about was when we looked at the children looked after and the asylum seekers, and how the Home Office had wrongly identified children as adults. And I think when we did our assessment, it was something like, I think we assessed 37, and out of those 37, 32 ended up being children. Have we had any, what's the correspondence been from the Home Office in regards to that specifically? Because if we're looking at the idea of reducing the number of children looked after, and most cities, I think most cities will receive unaccompanied children and asylum seekers, and we have a specific amount. But if we've got children who come in as adults as well, that's obviously going to increase. And I guess the other question: do we have any figures or numbers of children who are going back into family units as well? Thank you.
Yeah, so you're quite right, and we have talked about it previously, in terms of the increase in the number of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, who do then become children looked after in Leeds. So last year there was a 30% increase in terms of the numbers of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. Again, you're right that we have seen, and we are actually continuing to see more children who have been not assessed as children and who are arriving in Leeds and in hotels, where then there is concern expressed, whether that's by hotel staff, whether that's by other agencies going into the hotels, that actually they may well be children. And when they are assessed by children and families, you know, with that specialist approach and specialist assessments, that they are then deemed to be unaccompanied asylum seeking children. So that is something that we're very mindful of. I mean, in terms of Leeds, you know, every local authority is given a particular number of unaccompanied asylum seeking children, you know, and we've not, we're still well within that number, you know, but clearly, you know, what we are about is ensuring that we are able to meet the needs of these children, you know, and give them the right support in as timely a way as possible. In terms of, I think your last point was about the numbers of children who perhaps have been reunified with. Yeah.
Getting movement of being able to have children go back into. Oh, sorry. Yeah, just to say that last question wasn't specifically about asylum seeker children. It's just the sort of overall number of, you know, have we got children going back into family units from being looked after, I think.
No, thank you. And again, really, really, you know, important question. What we have seen is we've seen a decrease in the numbers of children that we are reunifying back with family, but that relates, I think, in the main to the increased number of adolescents who are coming into care, and then the challenges really that we have in terms of achieving that reunification. But that's where colleagues this morning have talked about some of the different approaches that we're taking to that. So again, increasing our reunification team. You know, one of the things that we've learned a lot, we have some evidence-based programs within the city, and you know, that research and evaluation of that work has highlighted where if there's some factors in place where it's much more likely that a child will be able to be reunified successfully with their family. So we're really drilling down into that, you know, looking at the children that we do have looked after, looking at some of the factors in relation to them, individual factors in relation to their family. So it's a very, very targeted approach in terms of identifying cohorts of children where we feel that actually reunification may be more likely, and then really, really putting in you know, that team around the child in terms of that multi-agency support. We've talked about education, you know, and actually often education is a key factor to that, you know, not only just in terms of reunifying children with family, but actually in terms of being able to maintain children, you know, with foster families as an example. So again, really looking at the individual factors and taking that multi-agency approach.
Thank you. Emma.
Thank you. I just wanted to highlight one of the stats about a proportion of young offenders who reoffend, which is, you know, sadly going up. And I know we're going on to the youth justice plan, and maybe that's a better place to talk about it. But I'm just sort of wondering what's behind that, and is it cuts to funding in the service that allows for like good work to go on with first-time offenders? I know that is an issue, or is it that we're then young people are going back into the conditions that have caused them to reoffend anyway? And like, just what you know, what work could be done to bring that figure down, because you know, I work with women with criminal record and know that once you've offended, and the chances of reoffending, and then, you know, if you've got a second offence, then your chances to break out of that cycle get harder and harder. So I'm concerned about that, but if it's better to answer that in the next report, then that's fine.
I'm happy to come in briefly, and then I'm sure colleagues that are going to join for the next report would like the opportunity to respond to that. But really, in terms of our reoffending rate, and I don't think this is dissimilar for other local authorities, but it tends to be a small, you know, so quite a small group of children, a small cohort of children who are reoffending. Often they are children, perhaps, for want of a better word, with the most prolific, really, offending, and also the most serious offending. We have had some national statistics which were released, I think, on Friday, which sort of shows that whilst the reoffending rate still remains a challenge in Leeds, actually the numbers of offences and the seriousness of the offences that the children are committing when they reoffend actually is reducing. We've got a number of specific projects aimed at reoffending. You know, one is turnaround, but I'm sure when colleagues come up, they would really like the opportunity to talk about that in the next agenda item.
Thank you for that. I'm going to bring Maria in a second. Just one, and Maria's will be the last question. Just one from me. I'm just looking at the persistent absence and severe absence. It's not so much of a question, it's just it is a concern, I know, of colleagues that is still stubbornly high, and I know it's across the country. We are slightly worse, I know, in terms of persistent absence in primary and secondary, and in terms of severe absence, again, slightly worse at secondary. But it is a real concern that is staying post-COVID stubbornly high. And I just voice it as a concern, something that hopefully we can, I think, as we go through the year, we can start to drill down on. No attendance is something we're going to be paying particular focus on. Welcome to have 30 seconds on it if anyone wants to.
Yeah, just very, very quickly, you're absolutely right, Councillor Cohen. One of the things that we want to make sure that we do is work strategically around this. So obviously, you know, we've got the 3A strategy. We're working to establish a local attendance forum for schools to share good practice and innovative approaches. We're publishing our code of conduct for how we use fixed penalty notices and other legal interventions to support attendance. And also coming up in the basically for the autumn term of this year, starting new DfE statutory guidance around how schools have to share attendance data with us in a timely manner, which will help us to plan our interventions. So what we've also got is a data tool which will help us to receive live information from schools rather than at annual census points. So we'll be able to be more timely and I suppose immediate in our interventions.
It is so challenging, particularly when there's somebody who just completely refuses. I know in one of the schools I'm involved in, a young person who we cannot get them through the door, and we've tried everything. And I know it's not an isolated example. It is such a challenge. And if there was anything innovative that we can come up with, I know there are pastoral leads across the city who will be delighted, because it's those school refusers that's just such a challenge. Maria.
Sorry, Chair, if I could come in on that.
Yeah,
sorry, Maria.
of course.
I think it's so central because those persistent absentee children and young people will become our needs. And there's a huge safeguarding element to when they're not in school, but their life chances and therefore their health outcomes and you know, the longevity of their life is all affected by their not, you know, receiving an education. I know it's a particular concern for me with our children looked after and how much they're and children with special educational needs and disabilities as well, just how much attendance that at school. So I really would welcome Scrutiny's support and challenge on this in the coming year. You know, as a former teacher myself, you can't teach them if they're not in the room in front of you. And we really need to get this right as a city to address all those other problems, including you know, criminality as well, which we're going to come on to talking about in the next report. So I really welcome that.
Yeah, it's that thing. Persistent absence is a challenge. Severe absence is really terrifying, actually, for the reasons you said. And that we know that those are the young people who just move through the system and miss out on so many opportunities and pose some of the bigger challenges. So yeah, I think that it is something we certainly need to be looking at. Maria, to finish this off.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up, we've spoke a lot about the foster children and the kinship and the special carers and how much support we're giving to the children. But actually, you've not once mentioned adopted children. We have lots of our members that are adopted, and they are absolutely totally neglected by the system. Most of them, and I genuinely mean most of them, are affected by fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. It's a really unrecognised learning disability. The brain is damaged in utero. That can never be repaired. And we are just not even highlighting these children. And they are a really big cohort of children that need looking after, as well as the foster children. Just because they're now adopted, it's like it's bums on seats. But they are causing families so many problems because they are not looked after properly within the system. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to, in colleagues' defence, obviously we're only going to pick up in this meeting something that colleagues raise, and obviously the report before us covers a huge range of issues, some of which we've just picked out as we go through, indeed, as you just have there as well. So I think I would hate anyone to take away the notion that there's an area that we don't look at. That the purpose of the board is for members to choose and to focus laser-like at what we look at in a particular circumstance. Sorry, I interrupted you, Julie.
I was really just going to validate and acknowledge what Maria's just said. You know, what we do know is, you know, we do have One Adoption West Yorkshire. There is a range of support available for families, you know, who have adopted a child. But we also recognise, and, you know, I think Maria's just highlighted there, you know, fetal alcohol syndrome, you know, the challenges, you know, that often do exist for those families. We do see you know, children who have been adopted at times come into care through family breakdown. You know, we're very mindful of that. Again, I think it was really helpful when Dan and I met with the Parent Carer Forum, just to have some specific feedback about, you know, the need for ongoing support and specific support, you know, in relation to specific needs like fetal alcohol syndrome that parents and carers shared with us. So again, it's certainly an area that we're very mindful of, and, you know, again, another priority for us. Thank you.
Thank you all. Helen, do you want to close us out?
Yes, please. Incredibly interesting discussion. It is a wide-ranging report. Obviously, it covers all the performance indicators, which makes drilling down a little bit difficult. But I've made a note of various different comments that have come from the board, and that's really useful. Thank you so much. It's for me, you know, when certain performance indicators get better, it has unintended consequences on others becoming worse, but that's really good in a way. So I'm really conscious and really worried about when we don't know about children, so they're not knowns in terms of the needs. That figure going down is great, but that means that the needs go up because they're not, we kind of didn't know where they were and what they were doing. So inevitably, a lot of them will be not registered anywhere and not partaking. But I'd rather know what we've got to deal with rather than the not known. So that's really important. Chair, if I could just ask for clarity on, in terms of the EHCP, you asked for how many are over the 20-week Do you want to know how many are over 30 weeks, how many over 40 weeks? That kind of, so I'll look. So just so that we can get it right in terms of what you're looking for on that. But really, I mean, and I also want to acknowledge, and it was, I think Councillor Edwards summed it up really well about just what pressure the staff are under, and and they're incredibly talented and hardworking teams, and I've inherited a superb and an outstanding team. That's not to say we're not complacent. We don't get everything right, and there's a lot of room for improvement. But just a huge thank you to everybody working on all these different areas of work with our children and young people. That if we hadn't been for 10 years doing that early help, I talked to bizarrely at UK Reef about an energy meeting, and talking to the head of finance in another local authority down south, who their challenges made me gasp in terms of they have a not much less number of children looked after than us, yet they are a quarter of our size in terms of city, in terms of the city. If we hadn't been putting in all that early help for the last 10 years, if we hadn't been doing all those interventions, and I just want to acknowledge that, what an incredible team that we've got. But we've got a lot of work to do, and we need to get everything right for our children and young people, and that's what we're determined to do. So thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. We are going to move on to item 12, the Youth Justice Plan, but we're going to take a 5-minute comfort break because we've been going for 2.5 hours, including the pre-meet. So we'll take a 5-minute comfort break, and then we'll move on to the Youth Justice Plan with a target to finish just after 1. All right, thanks. Okay, everybody, thank you very much for that. We are on item 12, Youth Justice Plan. I want to welcome Benjamin and Helen, who are here to help us with this item. Who's going to kick us off? I thought you both look at each other.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this report provides an overview of the 24-25 Leeds Youth Justice Service Plan and the work that really sits underneath it. It gives an update on activity, on the outcomes that have been achieved, and most importantly, on the next steps. It highlights as well, really, I suppose, the cost of living crisis and the impact that that has had on children and young people and families. And I suppose how that then, links to offending behaviours as well as child exploitation and serious youth violence. It provides information in terms of the youth justice services, both at a preventative level and also, in relation to our statutory intervention. It also provides or satisfies the elements of the core grant funding, the terms and conditions of that, which we receive from the Youth Justice Board. The plan will be taken to Exec Board in July with a view to it going to full council for adoption as part of the council's budget and policy framework. Appendix 2 of the report, as you'll see, also gives the recent outcome of the joint targeted area inspection that we had in Leeds in March of this year. And that really looked at how effective we were in terms of the multi-agency response to children aged 10 and over who are at risk or affected by serious youth violence. The joint targeted area inspection was carried out and led by Ofsted, also by CQC, the Care Quality Commission, so Health Inspectorate, HMICFRS, and that is Her Majesty Inspectorate of Constabulary, Fire and Rescue Service, and also HMIP, Her Majesty's Inspector of Probation. It's a very positive letter, very positive findings. It highlights the effective and well-coordinated multi-agency response to meeting the needs of children who are affected or at risk of serious youth violence. It also talks about the mature and embedded strategic partnerships that we have in the city, the strong and coherent culture that's based on a relational, trauma-informed approach, and also the Leeds practice values, our shared vision and principles. It also focuses or highlights the fact of the multi-agency focus on early intervention and prevention, and the high level of engagement that we do have as a system with children and with parents and carers. It talks about the fact that practitioners are astute, that they're committed and work relentlessly and passionately with children and their families to reduce the risk of serious youth violence and to inspire and direct children away from serious youth violence. As always, there is room for improvement. There's room for learning and development. We are required at the local authority as lead to produce a plan which will reflect really the findings of the inspection. We will coordinate that. Obviously, it's not just a plan for the local authority, it's a plan for the whole multi-agency. The Leeds Safeguarding Children's Partnership Executive Board is responsible for overseeing that plan and ensuring the effective implementation of the plan, and the plan will be returned to Ofsted at the end of August. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to add to Julie's comments there, we had the joint targeted area inspection in March, and some of the comments in that inspection report are incredible in terms of the partnership working. So the comments about health, our health partners, just one of the comments about the staff in A&E and how they treat, you know, look after children and young people who are being affected by violent harms, and it's and the police as well, in very, very difficult circumstances, what they're able to do to safeguard and look after our children in what are very scary environments in Ellen Road, and I'm not talking about the football stadium, although that it can be quite scary, but in the police station there. So I just want to say how incredibly impressed I am. Obviously, there's a lot to work on. There are always areas for improvement. But when something goes very wrong in with children, it is devastating, and it's really, really bad. What normally comes out in a review is that partners didn't talk to each other, and that the different agencies didn't talk to each other. And after this report inspection, I feel very confident that the partners and the agencies in Leeds are talking to each other for the best outcomes for children in the youth justice system. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm actually going to bring Emma in first of all. Thank you.
For my question from earlier, yeah, on the last topic that we discussed, I was just looking at the reoffending rate, and I just wondered if you had anything to add to what Julie said. Just obviously, we don't want that to increase, we want to bring it down, and I'm sure there is good work going on, but is it what are the reasons behind the increase, and what kind of offences are being done for like a second time? Because obviously the impact on a young person reoffending then, you know, limits their chances of breaking out of that cycle. And yeah, so is it could more work be done with the young person at the time, or is it poverty? Obviously it's probably a combination of lots of things, but yeah, if you could just unpack that a little bit.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, so there are a lot of factors that play a part. I suppose one of the things I wanted to highlight was that our first time entrant rate is actually reducing. But what that means is that we then have a smaller cohort of children who are committing offences. And what we're seeing in particular is that we've got a really small number of children who are, I suppose, almost quite prolific in the number of offences that they're committing. I suppose the other thing to highlight as well is the data that we kind of get in terms of reoffending rate is actually quite historic. So it isn't this year's data. We've just had some data released on Friday, which I have that in front of me, that relates back to April 22. So we are, I'm just checking I've got that right. Yeah, sorry, to June 22, the year before that. So we are quite lagged in terms of our reoffending data. But in terms of the current picture that we're seeing, it is a really small cohort of children who are committing lots of offences. Often they're quite low level offences, so there'll be things like shoplifting. So not necessarily kind of your more kind of higher end robbery type offences, because we would be seeing I suppose the court's response to those offences, but when it's kind of your lower level offences, they're often dealt with in different ways through different police disposals rather than through the courts. I suppose in terms of what we're doing differently, we've currently got a turnaround team that works with our preventative and diversionary end, and we are seeing an impact from the turnaround team. So they've been in place since November 2022. And what we've seen from the children that they've been working with is that we've got less than a 1% reoffending rate to date for those children. And obviously that's only quite a finite period of time, but we are seeing in the short term a positive impact from that. One of the challenges we've got is that's Ministry of Justice funding, which comes to an end March 2025. So that's a significant challenge for us as a service. What we've also seen is, there's a police outcome known as Outcome 22, which is also known as Chance to Change, and that gives children an opportunity to not reoffend again, essentially, without it kind of impacting the criminal record. In Leeds, we have started using that outcome. It was trialled in Bradford. And when you look at Bradford's reoffending rates with the data that we've now got to June 2022, you do start to see a trajectory of that going down. So locally, we feel that we're starting to see that, even though we don't have the national figures to kind of compare to. But that should make a significant difference as well.
And is there a breakdown of the offences that that are happening for a second time? Like, you say that it's kind of lower level offences, but obviously then often once you get on an offending ladder, it's a gateway to kind of, you know, more serious offences. So is there a breakdown age and gender wise as well?
I don't have that to hand now, but we can look at our own data and break that down. And it is something that we do look at as a service. We have, you know, biannual reviews of our youth panels, which is our sort of diversionary panel, where we do look at outcomes for children. So we do interrogate that data, and our Youth Justice Partnership Board also interrogates that data as well.
Sorry, I just want to pick up on something you just said in terms of predominantly low level offences. I'm not challenging you specifically, but I'm just looking at page 135 of our packs, which is page 19 of the report, serious youth violence, where it just says that serious youth violence has been a significant challenge for the city over the past few years. I'm just trying to tie that in with not in terms of raw data, but in impact, I suppose.
I think one of the features of serious youth violence that we do see is it's often children who have not been known to our service previously that then commit really quite significant offences or are found with weapons. We don't necessarily see that same kind of correlation of I suppose a significant number of offences for those children. There are, of course, some children who you see committing further offences, but we do see children seemingly coming out of nowhere from the Youth Justice Services perspective. That's not to say they haven't been involved with other services in terms of serious violence.
Thank you. Just to add, I think the cohort of young people who commit a volume of offences has some quite different characteristics to the cohort of young people where you have a serious offence taking place, and they have a different they have a different sort of presentation to service and a different way of engaging. But I think just coming back to the point about volume, people are committing a volume of offences, often as Helen says, at the less serious end. Part of the response to that is the support for their families and the support for their parents to engage with those young people. And part of the way in which the service is changing and adapting to that is reflected on page 145 of the packs, where we talk about some of the golden threads that we want to see tracking through practice over the next 12 months. And one of those that's really important is the role of parents and families, and our expectation of our staff to be engaging with parents and families, to be supporting parents and families, ultimately recognising, as we do across children's services as a whole, that parents and families are going to be the solution for a lot of children's behaviour and help a lot of children thrive and grow and develop. So there is adaptation in the plan as I've outlined, and some other things as well that we perhaps touch on later if we have time, where we're trying to change practice to address some of those higher volume of offending children. Just to add one further point, by reducing the number of first-time entrants and by using outcome 22, what we're seeking to do is to keep out of the system people who are unlikely to reoffend, because we don't want to bring them into the criminal justice system for the point you make, which is about them getting a conviction and then that being a barrier for them later in life without really any social benefit of that. But the impact of that, if we do it effectively, will be that the people left are those ones that we feel are most likely to reoffend. So conversely, we may see an improvement in performance, but that may be characterised by an increase in the reoffending rate, i.e. the number of people in the cohort who reoffend, but we'd expect to see that cohort being smaller. So essentially what we're doing is bringing our reduced resources to bear on a smaller number of people who are more risk to have an intervention with them to try to address their behaviour.
Thank you for that. Tony.
One of the things that always worries me is when you see an increase in caseloads, because an increase in caseloads often means a reduction more work put on individuals and less activity in others. Can you tell us of this 18% caseload, how many of them are new offenders? How many are re-offenders? And that's one question. And the other question is that you say that these caseloads are getting more complex. What about training? How is the training of the staffing covering these problems? Because I see you've got, like, you're using an apprenticeship scheme, which is sort of 5 levels. And the first cohort's coming into it, but not until 2025. What's happening now?
If I take your first, I suppose, question in terms of an increasing caseloads, because of the turnaround service offering work to children who we wouldn't have worked with previously, that is part of the increase in caseloads across the service. In terms of training, so we do look at the training need for the service kind of every year. We look at the features of the types of cases we're coming that we're dealing with. So an example of that would be we've had a lot of children linked to harmful sexual behaviour come through to the service this year. So we're investing in additional training for staff so that we're able to meet the demand increase in that area. In terms of the apprenticeship, that is about growing so we have qualified staff and we have unqualified staff. That's about growing our unqualified staff to make sure that they are kind of increasing their own skills so that then we can grow them into qualified staff. So it is about us growing our own and really trying to enhance the skill that we already have in the workforce.
I guess the key point to make is that not all cases are the same. So not all young people require the same degree of support and intervention to support them in their journey back from offending into a position of desistance. And what we'd expect to see is a growth in numbers, but a focus at lower intensity, greater volume work as we try to intercede fairly early on in a child's pattern of behaviour and offending pattern, and relatively fewer of cases where we're working at a more intense level to prevent a child who may be more involved in offending behaviour.
Thank you. Tim.
Thank you. I'm looking at priority 5 on page 130. It's close to my heart because I'm a careers advisor, education, training and employment. There are some wonderful examples later on, pages 140 to 143, about the kind of work and internships and projects these young people are involved in. My question is, are they all getting access to that? Because there's also lots of research saying if someone finds one thing that they are interested in, that then gives them an improvement across the board in terms of education. So it's wonderful examples, but are they all getting that, something like that?
So every child within the Youth Justice Service has access to an education officer who will work with the case holder, the child and the family to look at educational outcomes for children. In addition to that, over the next year, we're developing individual education plans, which we will be targeting on those children where we're seeing an increase in risk and in concerns for safety of others, and children who are in custody, serving a custodial sentence, so that we're making sure that their education is being supported upon release and resettlement from custody. So in short, the answer is yes.
Just in terms of, that's the education action plan, does that always include some kind of experiential thing?
Yeah, this is, I suppose, linking back to the 3A strategy that Dan mentioned earlier. It is about us looking at the whole picture of that achievement, attainment, and how we can support them to attend education. So yes, it's about looking at the whole picture.
Thank you. And Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Just going on to page 136 and 145 about priorities for coming years, and I know you've mentioned about the change of practice. I am I do youth, I'm a youth champion in my ward. And what I usually do is have meetings, because my ward is one of the most deprived in the area LS9, and we also do experience, you know, gang violence and machetes and all that. That is really a real concern to me as a representative for the ward. And I do have, the last time we had a meeting with parents, they're really obviously scared to talk about this part of this agenda. But also I've got other, you know, older kind of like youth that ask young boys what is the real problem, because they don't want to talk about it with the police. But it seems as if, coming back to the change of practice, there's so many issues. One of the guys has got like a massive, I think it's like a document that he's kind of like, is trying to kind of bring it forth to these meetings, where he needs us to change how the police approach, and not only that, but also having 15-year-olds and 14-year-olds being you know, held in cells, and yet at the end of the day they're not found to have any problems. They didn't do anything wrong. So I guess there is still a lot to be looked into in terms of change of practice, and I would like that to be explored. And possibly it would be great if I were to invite yourself some days to one of my meetings, and you know, you get to experience and hear from those impacted. If you would like to take up on that challenge, it would be nice to have you in my ward. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, I'd really welcome that. I suppose likewise, just to add on, that some of the issues that you've highlighted are issues that we look at as part of the Youth Justice Partnership Board, who has scrutiny of the service, and you know that includes other statutory partners and non-statutory partners. So police are part of that as well. So I'd really welcome visiting your service. Yeah.
Just to follow up on that, I think this is the first youth justice plan, I think since they were started, that's asked us to look at the experience of young people in police custody, which I think is what you're referring to. Leeds has got a really strong tradition of making sure young people are properly represented and properly supported in custody, and that's going to carry on, that will continue. But I think it's an area of work that we need to think more about and evolve more about in terms of how we support young people through quite a difficult, challenging experience for them.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose I just wanted to touch on equality, diversity and inclusion, and the fact that we know that there is an over-representation of some children from ethnically diverse backgrounds in the system. We've got a real key focus in terms of our early help, you know, and how are we engaging at a local level with children and families from ethnically diverse backgrounds. Also, we're very, very aware we have a real focus in terms of the Youth Justice Service Partnership Board, which I chair, on adultification as an example, you know, so really testing ourselves, testing the partnership to ensure that we've got that absolute understanding and commitment and awareness of what equality, diversity and inclusion means in terms of practice for the service. So I think it would be really valuable and really worthwhile, I think, for the service to come and meet with yourselves in your locality and hear some of those issues. I suppose the other thing just to highlight, and in some ways it goes back to the casework and the level of sort of cases for practitioners, is, you know, and you can see in the JTI inspection letter that we've got in the appendices today, this is very much about partnership working. You know, so it is really about how well we work with police, how well we work with health, the voluntary sector. I was really, really interested to see, it's probably about a year or so ago now, maybe a little bit longer, we had some evaluation of our early help hubs. And what it really, and in our early help hubs, we have domestic violence coordinators, mental health coordinators, substance misuse coordinators, early help practitioners, but most importantly, also we have police colleagues in there. And what that research showed was the impact that those early help hubs and that multi-agency working was having on reducing the number of children and young people who were getting involved in antisocial behaviour. And what we recognise is that, that really is about de-escalation at the earliest opportunity. But all of that was around teamwork, multi-agency work, and sharing data, sharing local intelligence, looking at, the top 10, the top 20, the top 50 children in a locality who were causing different agencies concern in relation to antisocial behaviour. But it would be great to come and meet with you and learn more about your locality. Thank you.
So just so everyone's in the loop, I've got Tony and then I've got David to close us out. I'm just conscious of time and people have next meetings as well. And can I just, Julie, thank you for that, because one of the things we have to specifically look to as our recommendations is just looking at that disproportionality of children from Black and ethnic minorities within the youth justice cohort. So thank you for picking that out, because that's something that we specifically would have, if you had not addressed that, then I would have had to make sure that we did. So thank you for making sure that was drawn out. Tony, thank you.
That's it, sorry. On page 135, talking about serious youth violence, it says the links between serious youth violence, exploitation, urban street gangs and serious organised crime is evident. That was evident in New York 25 years ago. What have we learned from other places? And how many people are involved in these teams? Do we, for example, concentrate on certain areas of the city where we know there is violence, and we know there is street violence, particularly street violence, or is it a citywide approach?
It's both. There are areas of the city that are being focused on from a multi-agency perspective. So there's currently a clear hold build, which is a police approach that partner agencies are involved in terms of the Hare Hills area to address specifics. So that there is that local approach. But I suppose the new model, the working together model, which encompasses Project Shield, which was launched at the Knife Angel in February of this year, that does look at themes and trends, as well as looking at specific children and specific incidents and direct responses to serious violence. And I suppose the approach is two-pronged. It's how do we react when there has been an incident, and how do we make sure that children are safeguarded and that partners respond appropriately, but also how do we prevent? And that's some of the work that goes on, particularly through the multi-agency child exploitation contextual meetings, where we are looking at themes and trends for the whole city and looking at a partnership approach to addressing those.
Just to follow on from your point of what we learn, I think what we've learned is that we don't resolve this or solve this as one agency on our own. And I think what you'll see if both locally and regionally is that there's an approach led by the police or led by support services or intervention services at different times at different levels of issue. So whether that's our antisocial behaviour colleagues working to address lower level behaviour, whether that's police dealing with serious offending or serious organised crime groups, whether that's our role in supporting young people or families to change their behaviour when those young people have become more involved in crime, whether that's the work with our family centres and our colleagues in early help, where we try to engage and work successfully with families to help them manage the problems that they might be starting to see the beginnings of. I think what we've learned is that we do it together, and we're more effective when we do it together.
How involved, for example, are the youth services with this? Because one of the things that they've found generally is that boredom's a big factor.
The youth service are fully embedded in terms of the partnership approach. So I would say they are very involved to their kind of level of capacity that they're able to be involved to.
Yeah, I'd maybe just like to jump in as well and just again, as is, I think, highlighted through the inspection letter following the recent joint targeted area inspection focused on serious youth violence. I think you can see the role of the Violence Reduction Partnership at a citywide level. So again, that intelligence, that data, which then enables us as multi-agency practitioners to drill right down to a locality level. So as an example, the cohorts of children perhaps in the west of the city who are involved or on the cusp of serious youth violence or impacted by serious youth violence will look very different to actually the cohort of the children on the east of the city. And that requires a very, very different intervention by us as multi-agencies. The other thing I think in terms of learning is innovation. You know, and actually what you'll see in the inspection report is a reference to the ROTH pathway, which is risk outside the home pathway. Traditionally, the child protection system in this country has really been arranged or been established to respond to risk inside the home. What we've recognised is, you know, as we've worked together with our partners, is actually serious youth violence and contextual safeguarding is about risk that children and young people face, which is outside the home. So in developing our risk outside the home pathway, we volunteered to be part of some research with Professor Carleen Furman, who is a renowned academic in the field of contextual safeguarding, risk outside the home. And what we were able to do is work with her and a small number of local authorities to develop this specific pathway. And key to this is recognising that as professionals, we can struggle, we can be challenged, you know, with these really dynamic areas of our work in the same way that parents and carers are. So that risk outside the home pathway is very much about us as professionals, as a system, working with parents and carers, recognising that they are part of the system. So just raise that just as an example of innovation. You know, it's something that only Leeds and a small number of local authorities, you know, working this way. It's a very different way to a traditional approach to child protection. And that's really about, it's evidence of our learning and our constant learning in an area of work which is, you know, very serious, very dynamic, very challenging.
Thank you for that. David, to close us out.
Yeah, thank you. So I've sat on the Youth Justice Board, and I'd sort of like to commend the work that's been done by the partnership in all sorts of ways. However, the area that I've been most concerned about is the Wetherby Young Offenders Institute. And I think the report that was done by the Prison Inspectorate showed that out of about 893 incidents of self-harming, over half were committed by 2 or 3 young women in the institution. So hopefully that's being addressed, and I think a report's come out in the last 2 or 3 days from the Prison Inspectorate to see how that's been affected, because obviously there's serious safeguarding issues that as a corporate parent, we have to have a concern about, because it's part of our remit, even though we don't have much control over the Ministry of Justice. So I think it's a really important area for us to continue to look at and be aware of. And also, I mean, you know, those young people, particularly the young women who shouldn't be there in the first place, have nobody to look after them unless we take that responsibility, I think. So that's as much as I can say.
Thank you, Councillor Jenkins. Hopefully to provide some assurance to that, you know, that's an issue that we are very live to. Farah, myself and our independent scrutineer from the LSCP executive met probably about 3 weeks ago at our request with the Deputy Governor of Wetherby YOI. It was a really helpful discussion, both in relation to how we ensure that there's effective safeguarding arrangements in place for young girls in Wetherby YOI, but also the fact that we now have adults in what should be a Young Offenders Institute. As a consequence of that, what we have agreed is that the Governor, I think we've got a date now, the Governor and the Deputy Governor are going to attend the LSCP executive in a matter of weeks, where we will discuss the overall improvement plan from the prison. And again, recognise, you know, that it's got to be a multi-agency response. You know, we have to support them as a system in order to meet the needs of the children that are in their care.
Thank you for that. I'm mindful of time, so thank you for that response. Helen, anything you want to say to summarise that? I think Julie's covered it, but if there is anything.
I think it has all been covered, but these are very, very serious issues that, although there's a small amount of children that are actually in the justice system, the effect it has on their peer group, on the communities, families, and the ripple effect it has on the communities is far-reaching and long-lasting. And so we need to get it right, and to tackle some, that we didn't used to see, and it's very, very frightening. But there's a lot of innovative work going on to make sure that we can see a downward spiral curve on this. So, and thank you for today's meeting. It's been really, really comprehensive and interesting, and just the sheer variety of work that goes on for our children and young people in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. We have at page 113 and 114 of our packs 4 recommendations that we have to note, or that we're asked to note as part of this. We made sure we brought those out. I've ensured we brought those out during the debate. Are we happy with those recommendations? Thank you, colleagues. That then brings us to the date and time of next meeting, which is Thursday, the 18th of July. It is, please note, an afternoon meeting at 2 o'clock in the afternoon with a pre-meet at 1:45. I promise I will try and get us all away before 6 o'clock in the evening. Thank you, colleagues.